Hello, everyone. Madeline Dale here. I've got an excellent author for you guys to check out today. Mr. Nathan Tudor is going to be hanging out with us and telling us about his book. So I'm going to let you introduce your book and tell us a little bit about it, maybe synopsis or anything you want.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So my book's called The Empire's Lion. It's an epic fantasy with some historical flair. It's rooted in a world that's kind of based on ancient Greek and Roman antiquity, with a lot of different characters from different cultures pulled into these kind of world-shaking events. And so the hero is this young woman named Reva, who's what's called an adept in the world. And basically that means she's got fire magic, and she is in service to the Lazaran Empire, which is kind of like the Rome of the day and the setting. But something goes wrong on one of her most important early missions to set her career. And now she gets, one chance after she's messed things up royally. And what she's got to do is go back to the land where she was born and conquer it in the Empire's name. And the book kind of goes from there. And, I get excited talking about it because, big stakes, lots of tension going on. I feel like action, magic, intrigue, it's right up your alley.
Yes, it sounds like it. And I love the cover. So I'm kind of getting like Gladiator vibes from her.
Mm-hmm.
Is it similar to like her world where they're fighting with swords and magic and everything? Is there kind of like ideas that come from like Gladiator or?
Yeah, there is. There isn't a gladiator scene in The Empire's Lion, but I do have the prequel, which is titled Adept Initiate, which that's available for free on my website. And there is kind of a little subplot where, she's going to gladiator games basically. And, she's kind of figuring out, is this a culture where I can fit in, and, getting a little uncomfortable maybe at the idea that, she's a girl from a very different world than a very different culture than Lazara. And she's coming here and thinking, okay, I kind of like blood sport. I kind of enjoy war. Who am I really?
So she kind of questions herself a little bit, like, why am I like this? I like that.
Yeah. And that's one thing that's been really cool to hear from readers is they like the tension of, she's kind of pulled into this military world as a method of survival. And, someone said, I don't know if this is a success story or if it's a story about, someone getting brainwashed and turned into a cold-blooded killer. And it's like, well, it's kind of both of them. And that's the fun of it is, how far is she willing to go for her own sake? When are her principles going to kick in and slow her down?
Nice. So where did you get the inspiration for her? Because she's a pretty unique character.
It kind of came from a couple places. So one, historically, outside the Roman Empire, one of the coolest concepts I've come across, and just always stuck with me, was from the Ottomans, actually. They had this elite fighting force called the Janissaries, who were all, the Ottoman Empire was an Islamic empire, but they were all these, Christian slaves, basically, that were raised as their elite fighting force. And so the concept of foreign-born soldier as your most elite warriors just always stuck with me. And so when I thought of the adepts for Lazara, I was like, okay, what would make it really interesting? And so I came up with this reason why they all have to be not Lazaran. They have to be from other nations.
I like it.
And then I was like, okay, so what then? And then I thought, well, the most interesting story would be, what if someone who's an adept has to go and fight against their own birth culture?
Yeah.
And the other piece that came in making Reva was one that I can't really get into because it's a bit of a spoiler, but I'll say I had this seed of an idea of the conflict between her and her main enemy in Talanus, which is the country she's from originally. And so I thought, okay, it's going to be her against this other character named Avi, who we also get his perspective in the book.
Yeah.
And I thought of their conflict, and that's kind of where, their personalities emerged from. It was, all right, what's going to make it interesting to see them fight it out, playing this, cat and mouse game against each other.
That makes me curious too, since you mention it like that. Is there any romance or maybe hints of romance in there with her character?
So not with Reva. Reva kind of unintentionally at first and then more consciously is kind of an aromantic, asexual character.
Mm-hmm.
But Avi does have a bit of a romance subplot in his story. And that also ties into, tension, because Avi he's kind of an antagonist, but also we get his perspective often enough that it's almost like we have opposing protagonists kind of. And so Avi is basically an assassin in service to the Talanisti king, who the Lazaran Empire is overthrowing, right? And Avi, at first, it's just his job, but he kind of starts to get, a little too friendly with the daughter of the new king, who's being put into place by the empire as like a puppet ruler.
Yeah.
So he's kind of in the situation of, this new king is my enemy, starting to fall for his daughter. Not a good look.
Yeah.
Some risky things could happen here.
So that kind of creates more drama, entertainment for the reader. So that's pretty cool. So I have to ask too, on the world building, did you have to do much research on this? Like, how did you go about creating this world for your story to take place in?
Great question. So I did have to do some research, but a lot of it kind of just was already floating around my head. So when I was in college, I did a degree in like ancient religion. And so I spent a lot of time, thinking about like Greco-Roman world, the Middle East, ancient Near East. And so when I decided, okay, I want to write a fantasy book, it was like, well, all these concepts and places are kind of already living in my head rent free. So I might as well spin them out into, my own kind of story.
Yeah, I like that idea. That's really cool how you put that into the story, because there's a lot of creative things out in the world, and that's really neat that you use what you learned in college and stuff growing up. Well, not really growing up again.
Yeah.
In college, you know what I mean? Oh man, college days. Gosh. So with writing this story, did you have a routine or a method to keep yourself going to work to complete the story, or did you kind of write when the inspiration hit?
It was, so at first it was more of writing when inspiration hit, but then I pretty early on had a pretty impactful conversation with this other author named Michael McClellan, who had just published his debut book. And we were able to get coffee, and he said, are you writing every day? And I said, no, not yet. And then he goes, all right, well, here's why you should. And, that really stuck with me. And from then I built, and I wasn't always able to hold to that everyday routine. Stuff happens. It's, we all know how it gets, but,
yes,
bit by bit, I was able to work through it. And one of the most helpful things for me as a writer is having an outline where I can always go, okay, maybe today's scene isn't super exciting, but I know that when I write this scene, it'll bring me, that much closer to, the big payoff at the end that I'm really looking forward to writing.
That's a good way to go. I like that, because I'm not one of those that can write every day either. Because it's life is chaotic. Or sometimes I'm like, I am so exhausted from doing everything else during the day, because marketing takes a lot of time. Writing is almost like the relief from, holy cow, I get to do this now. But yeah, no, I like that you do the outline, because it seems like it helps you stay on track. Like you mentioned, like you can just skip around. Like, I'm not feeling the scene today, so let's try writing this scene. And it helps you move forward. I've been trying to do that myself a little more, but it's definitely different. Like, My brain wants to keep going on one, and I'm like, this is hitting a wall. Like,
Yeah.
which, speaking of hitting walls, have you struggled with writer's block or anything similar to that?
Mm, I don't know if I'd call it writer's block. I'm generally on the side of, you know, you can always figure out something to write, but I definitely do hit walls in terms of motivation. So, I can absolutely know, okay, this is what I want to write today, or what I need to write today, maybe could be a better way of putting it. But then, really getting mired in self-doubt or like fear, like, this isn't working as well, especially if I've had a couple days of trying to make a scene work, but I can feel it's not quite meshing how I want it to be. Then that's when it starts to become, I have to fall back on really basic principles, like, just write the first sentence and just keep going. You can always, one of the things that helps me the most is reminding myself, no one needs to see this draft. I can always fix it down the line.
Yes. I'm with you on that. It can look like complete total crap. And you're like, I'm going to go back and fix it later. Don't worry.
Exactly. And it really does help.
Yes, definitely. Because mine, I've been working on when I started writing during NaNoWriMo. And I've been totally afraid to go back to look at everything I wrote because it was so just push. But I'm almost done with the whole entire draft of it. And I'm like, okay, this is going to require a lot of editing, and I'm kind of dreading it. But speaking of editing, what does your editing process look like?
My process is I kind of just fell into it with this last book. We'll see whether it changes or develops in any way. But I finished the first draft, and then I do a read through and kind of make a huge list of just things I noticed I need to fix. And it at the bottom is like the small things, like grammar and whatever, but then at the top it's stuff like this character is kind of inconsistent from the beginning to the end, or I don't really explain this part of the magic that well. I need to make sure to flesh that out. And then I spend however long that takes on crossing off everything on that list. And then at that point is when I'll send it to like some friends and beta readers and ask them, okay, this is as good as I can make it with my eyes. What do you see that I don't see?
Yes.
And then once I get their feedback, I go through it again, kind of. It's like, all right, 3 people told me that this subplot confused them. So, I'll take another look at that. And that's kind of how I go forward.
That's good, because having extra pairs of eyes to look it over is the best way to find stuff. I have a bad habit. I leave words out. I'll read it and like in my brain it's there, but somebody else will come through and they're like, you left out like 3 words in this sentence. Like, what happened here? I'm like
my most common one I think is not catching when autocorrect makes a word something close to what it should be, but it's really not.
Yes.
And then I'm trying to think. There was one I think that I caught after I had uploaded the file to Amazon. And then it was like really hastily, switch it out and update the file.
Those are always the worst. When you're just like, I can leave it or I can fix it and do the whole process. Because it's a tiring, exhausting wait while it processes the file, especially with KDP. Oh my gosh. It's like you wait forever. And it's like, you have time to go get a sandwich, maybe a coffee. And I'm like, just finished uploading my thing. Like,
please, I got other stuff to do, but I have to hit the button.
Yes. And it's like, I know you're not reading it right now, obviously. So there's no way they read all of those.
No.
But moving forward, are you turning this into a series? Do you have more books planned for this?
Yeah, so I'm working on the sequel to The Empire's Lion right now, and I've got it planned as a trilogy.
Yes.
With stuff just ramping up book by book, getting bigger. But I'm also thinking about, I haven't written any of these yet, but in the same way that the prequel is kind of a shorter, just single character focused book, I'm thinking about doing that with other side characters and just writing like, you want to know how, this person got to where they are when you meet them. Here's like their backstory book.
That is
'Cause
really cool.
yeah, because there's a lot of stuff that I wish I could fit in, but it's already a pretty long book and I don't want to drag it out too much. So
I get that because
I
you
figure
always
if
have
some
those side
people, yeah,
characters that are like, there's more to their story. I have a couple like that, and I'm like, I'll go back and do this, but it's on the list for like later, and ideas keep popping up beforehand. But it's fun to see the backstory of some of those side characters.
yeah, for sure. I saw something, I think I saw something on like author Twitter the other day that was it was like someone had drawn with emojis one person pushing another person off a building, and the person getting pushed off was the main character, and the person doing the pushing was, the side character that steals the spotlight with 8 words of dialogue. And I was like, I really feel that one.
Yes, because there's always that one. It makes me think of like the Thor movies, even though it's totally not a book, but it's still like art in its own form. It's like Loki. Everybody's become obsessed with Loki more so than Thor. And it's like, yeah, here's the side character just kind of sneaking in to steal the spotlight, which I'm totally a fan of both of them. But I mean,
yeah, both good characters.
Yes, agreed. So writing, is that your main job, or do you have a job outside of it?
Right now I'm writing, seeing where it goes. But whatever happens, no one can ever take writing away from me, right? So
that's true. Yes. Do you have any hobbies also? Sorry.
My hobbies are kind of like, I like to say like reading and writing is both like job and hobby kind of.
It is. I have to agree with you. So
yeah. And there's some stuff I read where it's like I'm in the mindset of I'm researching how to be a better fantasy author. And then there's other stuff I read where I'm just like, this is just fun.
Yes.
So that kind of balance is good.
Yes, it is good. And as also something I like to ask every creative I talk with is, do you have a self-care routine as well to help keep your mental health and stuff in check?
I think talking with friends is one of the most important things for me. It's real easy for me to like get into my own head and thinking, I gotta just focus on what I'm doing. But then, you kind of lose sight of, first off, you lose track of time. It's like, oh, it's a Thursday already. How'd that happen?
Yes.
And so having things scheduled with friends, whether it's like, all right, we're going to get online and play games together on a Saturday night, or I'm fortunate enough to have a decent number of other friends who are also creative. So I can talk to them about their projects, and that's really good for me.
That's good. Yeah. Creative outlet, social outlet. Speaking of games, what games do you play with your friends? Do you do D&D? Does that inspire your writing any, like whatever you play?
We used to play more games like that more recently. So I've got 2 friends who are actually making their own role-playing system. And so we've been like beta testing that for a few months at this point, and it's super fun.
Nice.
So it's kind of like modern superheroes. But in the classic, like, we're high school students during the day, saving the town at night kind of stuff. So
that's fun and very cool. Did that play any part into anything you've written?
No, I don't think so. That's kind of been just a good, spend time with friends, don't think about work kind of thing.
A chill, relaxed time.
Yeah.
So as an author yourself, and I know this is your debut novel, or okay. So for you, what does success look like? I know you're still kind of new to this, but what moving forward with your writing career would you define will be the point that you feel like you're successful?
That's a great question. Right now, for me, every time I get a sale or a review, that feels like a huge success. So longer term, obviously, if I get to the point where it's like, hey, I really can do this full time, that'd be awesome. But I think once I've got the full series out, I'll really feel like I've started to establish myself kind of as a sign to readers like, hey, I put this together. You can jump on the whole thing right now. Um, I think that'll be a big milestone for me in terms of career.
And also for new writers, would you have any advice for any new writer or someone that's aspiring to be an author in the future?
I think one of the most important things you can do is learn to view the work as its own reward. So, when we're writing books, there's usually a pretty long delay between starting a project and having it finished and out there in the world, especially. And I know, like probably all writers, I have a folder full of like projects that were started and abandoned. Some of them got further. Some of them was like, I got a few hundred words in, and it was like, someday I'll come back to it. But if you can buckle down and kind of trust, the payoff that I'll feel for having written a book is going to be so great that even if today writing feels like the last thing I want to do, there's something about the process that's inherently worthwhile, and the trust that eventually you'll have something to show for it.
So back on your book, your characters, did you have one in particular that stood out the most that you enjoyed writing?
I have a lot of favorites. One of my favorite side characters is this guy named Mouse, who the name is like a joke because he's like 6.5 feet tall and super buff, and he's like one of the best fighters in the whole country pretty much. And so he was super fun because he's always got a good attitude, and he's kind of got this deep laugh, and even when he's fighting people, there's this sense of almost like like maybe love is too strong a word, but he's like, there's nothing personal in it for him. It's just about the contest, skill. And so he's one of those side characters who I've really loved. But in terms of the core cast, the protagonist Reva is, she's so interesting to me, and her journey is so, like, to me, meaningful in terms of how she grows, the challenges she faces and overcomes. And so,
did you find yourself facing any challenges in creating her character and writing her character?
I think one of the big challenges in writing her was kind of allowing myself to be really honest with her internal struggles, as she's pulled between these two forces of self-preservation and serving the empire, and kind of these deeply buried sense of I'm fighting against people who I was born to the same culture and kingdom as them. And there were times when I was tempted to kind of just brush it off as like, oh well, she's professional, she's learned to handle this. But the best scenes, I think, came out when she's fighting, and then inside her head you're seeing like how much she's getting torn up about this, and she's questioning like, what's this worth really?
You tied in her emotional like turmoil as she was doing the activity. I like that, because there's a lot of authors that don't include that in their characters. That, for me, I feel like that makes the character more like almost like a 3D person instead of just like a 1D flat person that's just on the page. Like, they come out at you that way.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it really pulls you into the story when your characters are like that. Awesome. Well, Nathan, go ahead and tell our listeners and viewers where they can find your book and your work and you on social media.
Sure. So best place to find anything to do with me is at my website, nathantudor.com. That's where you can sign up for my mailing list and get the free prequel, Adept Initiate. And it's also got links to all the stores where you can buy The Empire's Lion. Right now, it's in ebook and paperback. It's on Amazon, Apple Books, Kobo, and I'm looking to add it to more stores soon.
Sweet. I highly recommend Barnes and Noble for that.
Yes, Barnes and Noble. It's on the list.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Nathan, for hanging out with me on the show today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.